Hi, beautiful watchers, and welcome back to the Lost in Adaptation November Nanos. My all-time favourite author is, and I suspect always will be, Sir Terry Pratchett, God rest his soul. My second favourite author is Bernard Cornwell. So as you can probably tell from the survey results, this episode is pretty much just a pet project of mine and a thinly veiled attempt to get more people to read the works of this author. The Sharpe books are definitely his most popular creation. They're a long-running series of novels, all based around the career of a badass rifle officer who played an unusually large part in deciding the course of the Napoleonic War. Yep, I'm doing two fictional histories in a row, although unlike Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, there's nothing supernatural in this. This is a fictional history that could actually have happened if Sharpe had been real. Just on the off chance that you're not familiar with this particular part of history, the summary is that around the turn of the 18th and 19th century, an extremely talented and ambitious French soldier by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte decided that he should be in charge of most of the civilized world. Britain, Spain, Portugal, and a bunch of countries that would eventually become Germany disagreed. Most of the books center around a real-life event or battle, and Cornwell goes to great pains at the beginning and end of his books to give credit to the historical people he's stealing the accomplishments of to give to his fictional character. While I maintain that they're a truly exceptional series of books, for honesty's sake I should probably warn you that pro-British patriotism is a large part of these novels, so my American brothers might not get as much out of them unless they're particularly interested in European history. In 1993, a TV series based on the books was commissioned. Each episode attempted to squeeze one of the books into about an hour's running time with varying results. The series is an interesting one for me because it's one of my first experiences of retroactively hating something. I saw the TV show first as a young lad and really liked it, then years later I read the books and everything changed. My opinion of the TV series went from fond nostalgia to quiet disappointment and then to outright disgust as I learnt how amazing the books were and just how badly they'd been mishandled in the adaptation process. Is it fair that I let this new knowledge of the books cloud my judgment of the TV series? Probably not, but you know, it's kind of the basis of my show, so fuck it. Some of the episodes did a decent job of trying to stick to the original plot. Not many, but some. They kept one of the most important things about Sharpe, namely that he was originally an enlisted soldier who, through an act of ridiculous bravery, got promoted to being an officer. At the time, this was an unheard of event. At this particular point in history, the British Army was the best trained, most efficient army in the world, but it was also the poorest led due to its policy of letting people buy promotions for extortionate prices. What you were usually left with was a highly trained, highly capable unit of men led by inbred aristocrats of no experience. Now I know that sounds completely mental, but there was a practical element to it, as colonels were expected to spend quite a lot of their own money equipping and feeding their regiment, and we did conquer a large percentage of the world with this system, so there must be some merits to it. Anyways, the knock-on effect of this in both the book and the show was that Sharpe was constantly looked down on by the other officers, had trouble gaining the respect of his men at first because they didn't see him as being any better than them, and passed over for promotion time and time again because he didn't have the cash to purchase his next commission. That a real-life, very important historical figure by the name of Arthur Wellesley, later known as the Duke of Wellington, featured heavily in the stories is true to the book. Wellesley is one of the main reasons Great Britain doesn't speak French right now. As I said before, the military had a bad habit of promoting people based on breeding and money, not ability, but it turned out that the richest, most privileged, aristocratic snob with unfair political connections in all of Britain was also one of the finest tactical and strategic minds to ever exist. We really lucked out on that one. That Sharpe and his best friend, an Irishman named Patrick Harper, initially hated each other and even tried to kill each other at one point is accurate. The character of Harper isn't bad either, as they paid due to his casual hatred of all things English. Some of the costumes in the show look depressingly cheap and paper-like, but most were not bad for accuracy to the book and real-life history. They clearly worked hard on the props department too, as I can't fault them on things like Sharpe's signature massive cavalry sword or Harper's multi-barreled volley gun. I kind of feel that as an adaptation, the Sharpe series was doomed to failure right from the start, if for no other reason that they just didn't have anywhere near the kind of budget it needed to do justice to the novels. In the book, the French columns descended on the British lines like a battering ram the size of a freight train. In the show, a group of reenactors just sort of wander towards the camera. In the book, men are eviscerated by the dozen by canister shots, sending blood and limbs flying in all directions. In the show, they just sort of fall over. In the book, 10,000 French cavalry come riding over the horizon. In the show, 10 cavalry come riding over the horizon. What I'm trying to say is, while it's perfectly understandable to not be able to afford to hire a massive army, that means you shouldn't be adapting a series of books about massive armies! To have any chance of working, this series would have needed to have Hollywood-level funding, and it's a bit much to ask the Americans to invest in a show that glorifies a country that they were, at the time, at war with. Unfortunately, the show's problems can't all be blamed on fiscal issues. It's probably the definitive example of my tell the author's story or tell your own story story, don't take the author's story and try to turn it into your story, saying. Obviously some things had to be changed for practical reasons. There aren't really any pristine 18th century Spanish towns anymore, and certainly none that the residents would be okay with an English production company blowing up in order to add to the realism. Another big problem was that the show somehow lost a good chunk of its original cast between the second and third episodes. For the essential historical figures, they simply found new actors, but whenever they thought they could get away with it, they wrote in new TV-only characters to replace the book originals. Also, for some reason that still eludes me, they chose to skip past some of the best books. They then came back to some of the titles later, like Sharpe's Gold, but couldn't use the original stories because half the characters were now dead. So they wrote a completely new one, and my goodness if it wasn't fucking awful! The writers of this show proved that the one thing they were worse at than adapting was original screenplays. One of the things I adore about Cornwell is how well he got into the heads of people living in the past. You really feel like you're seeing the world through 200-year-old eyes when you read his books. The mentality of his characters are sometimes bizarre and unrelatable, but they seem so very realistic. Despite having this as a starting point, the TV show is rife with weird, out-of-place 20th century reactions to things. As a character, the screenwriters just did not get Sharpe at all. They had him doing things like giving little speeches along the lines of "War is hell, but at least it's brought us together." Book Sharpe had been in the army since he was 15 and had been fighting for years before that. He literally had no concept of life without war. This is one of the fundamental bases of his character, and it's mind-boggling that they could have missed this. One of the show's few redeeming features is Sean Bean, but unfortunately I can't help but feel that he wasn't really right for the role, at least not physically. Sharpe is an unusually tall man from London with jet black hair. They cast a 5'9" blonde Yorkshireman. The TV series also moved things around so much, I swear I lost track of what was happening entirely. Characters that weren't supposed to show up until later books are brought in early, assuming roles that weren't originally theirs. Others that should have been killed off or written out keep popping up in later episodes they have no business being in. And on top of that, other characters that should have made appearances in multiple episodes were neglected until later and then given incredibly rushed backstories. Oh boy, I don't think I can even talk about this. There's 24 books and only 16 episodes, of which probably only about half are actually based on the books. Sharpe has an incredibly long and interesting career, and I really don't think I can do it justice by just describing it. I'm afraid I'm taking the coward's way out on this one and just saying you'll have to read the books. Sorry. The Dom's final thoughts. For quite a while I actually gave this series a little leeway because I just assumed that TV shows weren't capable of being epic enough to do something as grand as the Sharpe books. That is until a little show called Game of Thrones came along and turned that theory upside down by putting blockbusters to shame with its awesomeness. Yes, I know that's not the fairest of comparisons because in 1993 they wouldn't have had CGI worth a damn, but even if you ignore the special effects, Game of Thrones is proof of what awesomeness can be achieved with a shit ton of talent, effort and money. And regretfully, the makers of the Sharpe TV show had none of those things. As an adaptation, this series exists as an example of how to do everything wrong. They overreached, they hired a talentless hack to do the writing, they miscast, they muddled up the order of things, they changed so much for no apparent reason. Cornwell himself has been quite kind to this show in the past, but I'm pretty sure that's only because he's a really positive, nice guy. It's my forlorn hope that one day someone will reboot the Sharpe series, preferably in feature film form, and do it justice this time. In the meantime, all I can do is highly recommend the books to anyone with even a passing interest in military history, or those who just enjoy an incredibly well-researched, incredibly well-written book. As I can't imagine you haven't already guessed, I'm not recommending you watch the TV show. Unless, I suppose, you're like a hardcore Sean Bean addict and you desperately need a fix. If that is the case, I promise not to judge you. Good day to you.